The power of one. I want to talk to you about the power of one. We've heard from some fantastic speakers, some fantastic stories. 3 things about the power of one. Absolutely first and foremost, be optimistic, back yourself. Optimism is a force multiplier. Second thing, listen, listen, listen again. The best communicators are the best listeners. And finally, the whole world's a stage. Tell your story. In the time I've got with you, I'm going to share 4 stories. And the first one. This is all about wrong assumptions. I was invited to chair a leadership conference in Barcelona. And in order to get in the zone, it's a fantastic hotel, fantastic auditorium, 400 leaders coming from all over Europe to share their thoughts on leadership. So to get in the zone, I just got outside. One of my favorite cities, taking in the flavor of Barcelona. I'm wearing my usual work uniform, dark suit, white shirt. I'm getting in the zone, and I'm working out how am I going to open this conference with my limited Spanish. And as I'm getting into the zone, up pulls a brand new, beautiful Rolls-Royce. As it pulls up, the chauffeur in the front seat gets out. Grey uniform, peak cap, steps around the car, opens the back door, and out steps the most beautiful, gorgeous, middle-aged Iberian woman. And absolutely everything was in the right place. Hair was fantastic. The jewelry was superb. Haute couture dress, and the most expensive fur coat I've ever seen. The chauffeur went round behind her, picked the fur coat from her shoulders, laid it over her arm, got back into the Rolls-Royce, and drove off. As I'm still getting in the zone, she steps up to me, she says, "Excuse me, sir," in the most correct English. "Do you know where the leadership summit is today?" "Yes, it's downstairs in the ballroom." She said, "Thank you very much indeed," and laid the fur coat over my arm and walked downstairs. Yes, I was a little surprised as well. And I'm standing there speechless as she's walking down the stairs, and my stupor is broken when the tannoy comes on and says, "Please give a warm welcome to your host for today, René Carayol." I run down the stairs, I jump onto stage, "Buenos dias, welcome to Barcelona," with the fur coat over my arm. People start pointing in the auditorium about the fur coat. I said, "Let me tell you a story of the fur coat." I start to share the story. I said, "And would you believe the owner of this fur coat is sitting here in this auditorium? And I'm sure she'd like to come up on stage and collect the fur coat." Nobody moved. I had to turn the house lights on, and it was the longest walk in the world. She came upstairs, and I presented her with her fur coat and said to her, "Sometimes, just sometimes, wrong assumptions can be the greatest learning opportunity ever." Now, the ending to that story is, I've been back to Barcelona many times. And every time I go back, I meet my now very good friend with the fur coat, with her husband. We have dinner, but first thing we ever talk about, that fur coat. So wrong assumptions. Wrong assumptions. My second story for you. I want to take you right back to that tragic day of 9/11. And this story is all about culture is more powerful than strategy. Far too many organizations, far too many leaders, far too many people focus on strategy as their way out of their problems. Strategy is the way forward. I put it to you that culture is so much more powerful. It's that tragic day of 9/11. We've got a very small but very successful bank in the UK called First Direct. I want to tell you a little bit about First Direct. It's the most expensive bank to bank with in the UK. But it has the least customer churn. Now that gets my attention. So it's very expensive, but nobody ever leaves. What's right about First Direct? When they were formed some 20 years ago, they were the first ever 24/7 telephone bank in the UK. 24, no branches, the virtual bank. You could call them at any time, 24 hours a day, and get the service. Get any service you like. They had a promise. And the promise was, whenever you called First Direct, no matter what time, a human voice would answer the phone within 3 rings. As the world moved on, the world changed, they changed. We went from 24/7 telephone bank to 24/7 internet bank. But they kept the promise. No matter what time you called, you get a human's voice within 3 rings. Internally, they had some huge debates. Virtual bank, it's effectively a huge call center, contact center. It was proposed that they take on that IVR phone technology, where when you dial in, you get a huge number of options. Option 1 does this, option 2. And it was proven, the metrics proved, they'd be more efficient, they'd save money if they went to an IVR system. The chief executive, who's now become a very good friend of mine, Chris Pilling at the time, refused to take the efficiency because what they stood for was the most tremendous customer service. And even though it's all automated internet, if anything went wrong or you just wanted to speak to someone, dial that number, you'll get a human voice within 3 rings. That tragic day of 9/11. The second aeroplane goes into the second tower. Some machinery falls. It falls on top of an Englishwoman who's working in the second building. She's trapped, she can't move, but she's got a mobile phone close to her hand. She's losing consciousness. She makes one call. Who does she call? She's a customer of First Direct. She calls First Direct, a totally landlocked British bank with no presence in North America. Within 3 rings, she gets a human voice. She says, I'm in the second tower. Some machinery has fallen on top of me. I can hardly move. Could you please get my husband on the phone? Can you please also contact my children? The operator says, of course, madam. One of my colleagues is calling your husband. Another one of my colleagues is calling your children. She'd noticed she was losing consciousness. She kept her talking, whilst a third colleague had contacted the emergency services. She kept her talking for some 45 minutes until she was rescued by the emergency services. Culture is more powerful than strategy. You can't train that sort of attitude. It comes with the culture of the business. Third story. I'm chairing a conference, keynote speaker, Bill Clinton. But he's not on till late in the afternoon. He's in Toronto, we're in London. I've got 2,000 people in the auditorium. Everyone's waiting for Clinton. He's going to come over the satellite link. The whole day, the energy's building up for Clinton, Clinton, Clinton. After every speaker that comes on, I'm taking some questions, and as Chris will tell you, as if you're the curator, if you're the host, if you're the MC, as the questions go up, you soon learn who not to give the microphone to a second time. And there's a woman in a red dress at the back, and she's very excited. She's jumping up and down, give me the mic, give me the mic. Early on in the day, I got the mic to her. She got the mic there. She was so hyper. She could hardly speak. She was going to... I said, can you calm down, please? She just couldn't calm down. I just made a mental note. Never give the microphone to a woman in the red dress again. Bill Clinton comes on. Doesn't matter what your political thoughts about Clinton is. He's over a satellite link. I've got 3 screens behind me, just showing his head, and I'm telling you, the charisma came out of the screens and filled the room. It was amazing. He finishes, and I'm starting to take some questions from the audience. Fantastic questions. Every question he gives a full and brilliant answer to. The woman in the red dress is jumping up and down at the back, and I'm ignoring her. The girl's walking up and down with the microphones. She's jumping up and down, and I'm ignoring her. Eventually, she tackles one of the girls and grabs the microphone. Mr. Clinton, Mr. Clinton, no one could understand a word she was saying. It's a London audience. They're impatient. Get her off. Shut up. Put it down. And she's just going as fast as she can. No one can hear her. I can't understand a word she's saying. I turn around and look at the 3 screens. There's Bill Clinton. He's doing this. It's time for the MC to act. I look at the guys on the audio and I say, cut the mic. They cut the mic. We carry on. Taking a few more questions. Then I hear this voice. Hey, René! It's Bill. He said, that woman that was frustrating you. She was actually making some really good points. Do you mind if I just take a moment and respond to some of the points she was making? What? None of us could understand a word she was saying. He then went on to answer comprehensively all the questions she was asking. What a humbling moment for me. What a humbling moment for everyone in the auditorium. The lesson we all took away. The best communicators are the best listeners. So my final story to close with. I'm chairing a conference, keynote speaker, Rudolph Giuliani. Not the most charismatic, not the best speaker I've ever heard, but he told a story that I will never forget. And I don't want you to forget it either. He talked about growing up in 1960s America, in New York. He remembered he was about 7 or 8 years old. And his father said to him, because this was the time of the civil rights activists, son, these civil rights activists are a bunch of communists and dangerous for America. And by far the most dangerous of the lot is Martin Luther King. It just stuck with him. He was 7 or 8 years old. As history would have it, on a hot summer's afternoon, in Central Park, New York, it was announced that Martin Luther King is coming to speak to thousands of Americans. Not just his followers, thousands of Americans. His father said, son, I want you to come along and hear how dangerous this man really is. They're standing, Central Park, New York, on a hot summer's afternoon. He's holding his father's hand, and Martin Luther King is electrifying the audience from the podium. He says, son, this man's a communist and he's dangerous for America. After 15 minutes holding his father's hand, listening to the oratory, he feels his father's hand go hot and sweaty. After 30 minutes, he looks up, he sees a tear falling down his father's eye. On the way home, his father says, son, we've just been in the presence of greatness. That man stands for one thing and one thing only, nonviolence. And in those dark days in the 60s, in the USA, things were tough, very tough. Lynchings, beatings, shootings, hangings. It was so tough, but somehow Martin Luther King and his followers always managed to turn the other cheek and never resort to violence. So much so they went on to shame a nation. into changing its stance on civil rights. So let me ask you, what do you stand for? How will you be remembered? And just to close, where I came in, the power of one. We've had some fantastic speakers today. From Afghanistan to Egypt, from Australia to America, from Scotland to Switzerland. We're closing off with Britain. And the three things I'd like you to remember about the power of one: be optimistic and back yourself. Listen, listen, listen again. And just remember, the whole world's a stage. Tell your story. Thank you so much for listening to me.